Hello and welcome back once again to Organic Cardboard. My name is Owen Kneep, and today I'm going to take a look at Tiny Epic Vikings. Tiny Epic Vikings is the latest addition by Gamelin Games for their Tiny Epic series. And Tiny Epic Vikings, you are a Viking clan that is vying for control over territory over these islands. And ultimately, you're trying to gain favor from the gods that are represented by runes. You're going to have three different runes, three different gods, and the runes are also going to be represented on the map as each island is associated with one rune and thereby one god. And as you play, you're going to be increasing this like fury track of each of the gods, which is going to ultimately show how many points those territories are worth at the end of the game. Whoever's whatever god gets up highest on that track is going to be worth more points for all of those runes that you have. You're going to get those runes represented by the islands that you control at the end of the game, as well as by these favor cards that you can get from battling. So anytime you go through a battle, you'll pick one of these favor cards that are going to be out on the board for you to see from the beginning, and you'll get to select one of them to represent the spoils for that battle. And then whoever wins the battle gets to keep that favorite card. You can keep up to 3 on your player mat, and those will add up to like a separate point value at the end game. So at the end game, getting points based off of the runes that are showing on those favor cards, again, as well as the island territories that you control. So as you play the game, it's gonna kind of bounce back and forth a bit as far as what runes are worth the most. The early part of the game, well, you're gonna go through 3 rounds, 3 like ages or eras or whatever they call it, and in each one of those eras, you're gonna be trading these runes back and forth. Every time somebody takes over an island, they're gonna gain the rune from you. It's gonna increase the fury of that particular god. So the more times it changes hands, the more that it's gonna be worth at the end of the game. But you're not gonna really be able to see that until that final round, as far as who's actually getting what points. So the first 2 eras are kind of you getting set up in a way. You've got an ability to create, to build boats as well as these temples, but you're kind of limited. You can only ever have 4 boats out, and you can only ever have 2 temples out. Now playing the solo version of the game, I haven't got into the multiplayer version yet, but at least in the solo version, you don't lose your boats. They can get knocked off of these little dock areas, but otherwise once they're built, they're out. I'll give you a little bit of a bonus when you do a harvest action that allows you to get resources to be able to do things like put out extra Vikings or build or to be able to do combat, like take over. There's little villages that you can grab that basically just give you an additional kind of wild action that you can do at the end of your normal turn. That'll be limited to those. They're kind of like a one-time use resource. But as you go then, though, you're going to be being able to get enough materials in order to set yourself up for that final round, where you're gonna jump to these different islands and try to take control of them as you can, depending on how many Vikings and things that you got set out. You can only have like 6 Vikings at a time. Your solo opponent, though, the AI is going to have twice as many, so they can have up to 12 Vikings out, which isn't as bad as you'd think. Sometimes, at least in my game, they concentrate a lot on some islands, and so there were plenty of times where they weren't really too much in my way, and there were certainly ways to still gain those islands back from them without too much of an issue. But it was definitely apparent to me, though, that the first 2 rounds, like, you don't know who's going to win or how it's going to play out until that final round, because these runes are just going to change hands so much. You're just not going to know until the end. But if you've got boats built, if you've got temples built, then you're more secure. It's going to be easier for you to take over these different areas at the end. The solo opponent, as far as I can tell, is just kind of random with all of their actions. Now, on a normal game, every round you're going to have a certain number of cards in your hand that are going to be drafted. The solo version of the game, you are instead of doing a normal draft, you're going to take that number of cards. It's going to be 4 cards in the first round, 5 cards in the second, and 6 on the last one. And you're going to create these little 3-card piles that are equal in number to the number of cards that you'd be getting in that round plus 1. So in the first round, you're getting 4 cards in your hand. You're going to put 3 separate little piles of cards out. 5 separate piles of 3 cards out. And from those, you are going to take any one that you want. You look at them, you pick one of the cards to keep, you put the other 2 in a pile that goes towards the solo opponent. And then you're going to do that again until you've got the 4 cards, and then the final pile you just don't even get to look at. So there'll be a little bit of hidden information as far as that's concerned. But the solo opponent is just going to take that stack of cards, shuffle them up, and essentially get as many turns as you would. You can lose turns by choosing to fight instead of using your actions to do things on the board, because some of your cards are going to have ways for you to be able to fight without actually having to lose the other actions on the card, because each card is going to have the option to either fight with it, or you can use it to get some ability like sail your ship, to be able to put Vikings out, or maybe be able to move some Vikings, or to harvest resources, or to build. And so they're all going to have that ability on them, but then they're going to have this rune ability at the bottom, and that rune ability is going to be associated with either cards that you've already played that round, or runes that you've gotten from taking over the different islands. So every time you take over an island, when you take control of it, if you have more influence there based off of boats and Vikings, and if you have temples and whatnot, then you'll get to use that rune as a requirement, like a fulfillment for the requirements of this rune action that your card can do at the bottom. And then as you play it out, it's not so much of like an engine building aspect, it's more just like a card interaction from previous cards that you played. Each one of your cards is going to have a rune associated with it as well in the top left corner, and it can either give you stronger effects, or just give you the general ability to play that rune action at the bottom. And some of them have the ability to go into combat with that card. And so what I found is that in general I didn't want to waste a turn going into combat otherwise, because the way combat works is that you just put a card down, and it has a combat value in the top of it, and that could be modified. Sometimes you have to spend this iron or whatever to be able to use that card for its attack value. And then when you do that, your solo opponent's going to immediately battle you for it, but they don't lose any cards to do that. They just get a random card off the top of their deck. Most of the time you can be pretty safe on beating them, especially if you're playing there's certain cards that are just made to be used for attacking with, but in general it's not too hard to outcompete them and then get your favorite card and be able to save that for the end of the game. So that random nature, though, of the solo opponent just getting, every time it's their turn, they're just drawing a random one off that stack and playing it, and so you really have no idea what's going to happen. Sometimes they just kind of come in and mess up stuff that you got, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're doing stuff that's benefiting you almost. So I didn't really see the solo opponent feeling anywhere like a human opponent, so don't expect that going into the game. But I felt like it did create like a fun puzzle to play with. This game is much more of a Euro kind of style game, like a Euro area control. There's tight little actions that you're doing, but it's not Tiny Epic Blood Rage. It's similar in theme. You got the Vikings, You've got 3 eras, but you're not losing land like you would on Blood Rage. It's not got that kind of aspect, and there's not a whole lot of blood, and there's not a whole lot of rage, because the only rage I would see is that if you pull off that solo opponent's or their card, and it just messes up something in a way that wouldn't even be possible for a human player to do. Like for instance, that when they do a harvest action, instead of just getting resources, they don't spend resources on anything in the game. They just get to have it whenever they're going for it. And instead, when they gain resources, it gives them a bunch of extra actions. So when you're drafting the cards out, sometimes you're thinking like, do I want all these harvest cards? Because if I don't, I'm giving them to them, and they get these bonuses every time they're moving through their resource tracks. And if they get to the end of the resource tracks, they end up resetting it back to the beginning, and you actually have to lose one of those resources of whatever that type was. So yeah, pretty random as far as that's concerned. But overall, though, I found it very enjoyable. It was a little bit of a thinker. I did end up like completely smoking the solo opponent at the end, but it was not apparent that I was going to do so. I would say that there's a good chance when you play this, especially solo, that you're either going to get completely whooped or you're going to completely whoop them. There's not a whole lot of rune ownership at the end of the game. You're going to get those favor cards that you can trade out for additional combat at the end of the game. Like if you're winning combat, you could get an additional favor card. Might give you some resources that you're probably not even going to be able to use at the very end, but maybe, just depending on how your setup is. But otherwise, like I think I had like 3 of one rune and maybe like 2 of another rune on the favor cards, and then I had I think maybe 2 of each. Yeah, I had 2 of each of two different types of runes that were from controlling the islands, because just luckily at the end the solo opponent didn't draw things that was allowing them to just take over some very easy to take over islands. If I was playing a person, they would have been able to kind of see exactly where they should go and take over those spots. So, yeah, I mean, overall, I rated a 7.5 out of 10, and by doing so, any games that I would think that are a 7 or higher are going to be games that I'm going to actively want to play at least occasionally. I'm not going to just go after this game constantly, but I want to play it again. I want to play the multiplayer and see how that is, and I also want to try out the solo too with the Ragnarok expansion. Now my game came from Kickstarter. There's the full deluxe with the expansion, so there's one extra little expansion in here too with some shamans, but the shamans do not add a whole lot into the game. They're basically characters that can affect the rage tracks of each of the gods. So there's certain ways you can do that without them anyways during the game, where you know maybe you've got a bunch of one type of rune and you need to bump your track up higher so you can be the one getting more points for the runes at the end. But you're going to be pretty limited with the shamans. You got a way to do that maybe a little bit more easily, but otherwise it doesn't change much in the game. Now with the Ragnarok expansion, you're going to be going against giants, and the giants are going to be worth points. And that's going to kind of also the lands are different too. On the normal game, you've just got these islands that are separate and don't have they're just one area of land. On the Ragnarok, some of the islands are split in half, so you've got extra places that you can go to on each of the islands. Or actually, from looking at the back of it here, it looks like all of them have that aspect, and then they got their own runes associated with it, and a little bit of different mechanics where they've got docks that are situated in ways that are kind of between 2 islands, so it can change up the way that there's more variability, where you don't know immediately what somebody's able to do with the docking of their ships. And then you've got Valkyries too that are going to be used to attack the giants, as well as give you some different, little bit different abilities, but essentially the same game, just some extra goals to go after instead of just the base game. But yeah, it's relatively simple. Now this is a Tiny Epic game as far as like being able to fit it into a tiny box. I found that I just had to get rid of all the bags. I'm bad for sleeving all my games, so I did sleeve all of this. So I'm sure that didn't help me out. But I was able to pack everything back in the boxes without having any lid lift. I tried to do it with the bag at first, and it just wasn't quite working. But in order to do so, though, I had to just kind of scatter and piece out all the little components into the box, and that's a pain, and not something I look forward to having to put back in the box again. But it is what it is, and at least my cards are sleeved, so they're protected. But otherwise, yeah, it's not exactly a great experience putting the game back in the box. And then to get it out, there is a little bit of a setup, but the map's pretty cute because it's the first time they've used a actual game board in one of their Tiny Epic games, and the artwork is fantastic in the game. I think this is the best artwork that I've seen in any Tiny Epic game. I think all of the cards are just exceptionally good. Well, they're not only are they pretty, but they're good quality. They got the linen finish to them. And but each one of them is a separate Viking. Some of the abilities are similar, so you're going to see a lot with kind of similar, actions and things that you can take. Maybe the runes are different or something, but otherwise they're not completely individualized in that way. But the different paintings, and they all have their own names. So they're really pretty. Some are really neat looking too. So that's fun. You're not going to see the same exact card every game, or at any time in the game, besides the ones that you played, or if you have to reshuffle the deck and get them back out again. But otherwise, again, 7.5 out of 10, real solid. I think it's definitely worth checking out. If you like Tiny Epic games, if you like Euro games, if you like area control games, if you like Viking games, I think you're going to enjoy Tiny Epic Vikings. That's just another solid entry in the series. So if you're thinking about getting it, I don't think you're gonna be disappointed. Just be aware that when you're going into this game, it is a little more Euro-y than maybe you would expect, and it's definitely not Blood Rage, so don't expect it to be Blood Rage. But anyways, if you guys have ordered it, I hope you're getting them in soon, or I hope you've already gotten them. But otherwise, check it out. Check out the solo. I think it's a good experience. But if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoy this kind of content, you can always give me a couple of those free little clicks on the screen. It really helps out channels like mine. But otherwise, I thank you so much for stopping by this evening, and I hope you guys are just having a great time, enjoying your games. And until next time, keep an eye out for more videos like these. I'll see you next time. Take care.